Welcome to Bold and Unapologetic Bad Chapters, Great Stories. Today's episode, I will be interviewing an incredible woman and author, Wafa Ghnaim. She's the author of Tatreez and Tea, Embroidery and Storytelling in the Palestinian Diaspora. Wafa is a Palestinian-American businesswoman, writer, and artist. Welcome, Wafa. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited because for those that don't know, Wafa and I go way back, but this is the first we've spoken in like so long in like actual, I won't say person, but virtually. So I'm excited to have this chat. So with Tatreez, I'm going to kind of bring it back to the basics because there are a lot of people that are listening that don't really know what it is, the history of it. So Wafa, for those that may not know, your book, Tatreez and Tea, shares the art form of traditional Palestinian embroidery that we call Tatreez with the world through artwork, stories, and how to actually do it. What is Tatreez, and can you share with us some of the history behind this Palestinian embroidery?
That's a great question, and there is a lot of interest lately about Tatreez and what Tatreez means. So technically, the word Tatreez, it's an Arabic word. Obviously, it means embroidery, and so in a technical sense, Tatreez actually just refers to generally embroidery in the region, or embroidery in general in the world. However, as a Palestinian in diaspora who learned, myself and my sisters who learned Tatreez, and actually many Palestinians in diaspora who learned embroidery traditions from Palestine, from our mothers and from our grandmothers, it was taught to us in Arabic. It was taught to us as Tatreez, not embroidery, and it was taught to us in our mother tongue, Arabic. And so oftentimes you find Palestinians referring to this art form as Tatreez instead of embroidery because of that essential connection to our language and ultimately essential connection to our Palestinian identity. Tatreez Fallahi, which is like embroidery of the villager, does refer to Palestinian embroidery. And what makes Palestinian embroidery really different or really unique than maybe other kinds of embroideries? First of all, Tatreez is passed down from mother or grandmother to daughter, traditionally. Now, of course, I'm teaching men and women, boys and girls, so it's not quite like exactly this way. But traditionally, historically, that's how it was passed down. Women and girls didn't always attend school in 19th century and earlier in Palestine, and their schooling was at home. And sometimes here's an example. My grandmother didn't learn how to read or write when she was young, but she used Tatreez as a language and as a way to document her stories and her observations and her opinions. And so what we find as we're learning about this art form, as we're keeping this art form alive, is that Tatreez is far more than just the practice of needlework. Tatreez is a way of encoding our stories as Palestinian women, and that there's this long line and ancestry of Palestinian women that have done the same. And it is really on us to keep their stories alive, to learn the language of Tatreez and to learn how to practice Tatreez to ensure that it really truly stays alive in its essence.
I love that. That's so cool. So with Tatreez, hello, can you hear me? Okay. So with Tatreez, I love hearing the history of it. It's obviously, I'm Palestinian, so it means something to me, but I hope others can kind of find an appreciation for it. So can you tell us a little bit about the different types of Tatreez that we use based on the villages, based on the meaning? I know I went to Bethlehem one time when I went to Palestine, and there was they have a Bethlehem culture center, and I remember the woman there. I want to say her name is Maha. Can't remember, but she taught us this really cool thing where like women would actually put in their designs, like you could tell what village they were from, you could tell if they were single or married or had kids. So I thought that was super cool. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
And that's all part of the language of Tatreez. So absolutely, pre-1948, there were, actually, I wouldn't say 1948. We're not going to use as Nakba the dispossession of Palestinians to their homeland and the creation of the Israeli state necessarily as a marking point. I would say after World War I and the introduction of transportation and major transportation lines in Palestine, where Bedouins, Palestinian women, Palestinian families were able to travel much easier across all of the villages. Before that period, around the 1930s, there was a much more succinct kind of styling and costume per village. Actually, what's interesting about the 1930s is this is really when the Bedouins of southern Palestine began to do embroidery, because traditionally Bedouins don't do embroidery. They do weaving and other kinds of crafts like this. But that's an interesting point. A lot of people think the Bedou actually have been stitching for centuries, but they haven't, because they haven't had access to these specialized materials until the introduction of transportation. In any case, for all the other villages, when they started to connect with one another more and more through transportation, of course, through refugee camps and diaspora, these sort of regional distinctions started to significantly change, actually. Before that, Palestinian women took pride, and actually they still do. We all take pride in our village origination, but they represented that pride through their embroidery and the story of their village in their embroidery. So they had very particular thobes that they wore that represented their village origination. But also, as you were referring to just a moment ago about social status, absolutely, the social status of Palestinian women was represented in their tatreez and in their thwab. A thob, for the listeners who don't know what that is the traditional Palestinian dress. And it is of primary importance for Palestinian women to express, you know, if they're married, if they're not married. What's important here is to understand that different communities in Palestine presented their social status in different ways. So in Bethlehem, their dowry and their marriage status would be represented in their shetweh, in their headdress, right? With the coins lining it and everything like that. The Bedouin used specific colors in their embroidery to represent their social status. Blue, of course, being that they are widowed, and they would add like pinks and purples to represent being remarried. This is actually a point of confusion for many practitioners. There's a lot of reference that all Palestinian embroidery, if it's blue, represents mourning. And actually that's not the case. It's really the Bedou people that indicated that through color. Blue represents different things. Like you would see young girls wearing blue thobes in other villages, for instance, that have nothing to do with being widowed.
It's great that you actually mentioned thobes, because it was one of the questions I was going to ask about the relationship between Tatreez and thobes, the Palestinian traditional dress. So that's great that you mentioned that, because I know a lot of people are like where do you see it? Because I've seen people do it on pillows. I've seen people do it on fabric, on like different fabrics that they hang up in their house as decor. But actually, was it always the initial way to see this embroidery was traditionally on thobes? Was it, or was there other places that they would kind of be stitching this type of embroidery in Palestine?
It's a really good question. I think that so we stitch it onto our dresses. That's really ultimately the important part of learning Tatreez, is learning how to get it on a thob, how to create a thob, and how to work together with your community to create a thob in preparation for marriage. However, in our culture, we frown upon waste, and with something so valuable that takes so much time and energy and design and creativity, it is very frowned upon after a thob has gone to the limits and it's got holes and becomes tattered, to throw it away. So Palestinian women would then cut out the embroidery and repurpose it for items around the home.
Wow.
Or recreate, they would piece together different dresses to create. So we actually have this long history and this tradition of recycling our embroidery. However, if we fast forward to post First Intifada, so like Oslo Accords 1993, we start to see more and more Tatreez produced just for wall hangings. Of course, Palestinian women, I'm sure, have produced just stuff for wall hangings. Like, there's no real absolute way of saying yes, no, and art is art, and every family is going to have their different practices. But from a general collective view, from and a historical account, we see an emergence of wall hangings and of nationalist symbols like the Palestine map and stitching the Palestine map around the Oslo Accord period. And First Intifada really marks a time of real innovation in this art form. And of course, in any art historical context, from Impressionism in Europe to the development of pop art in the United States after industrialism, we see politics and art merge. And political events are always a part of the story when we're talking about the development of art and the innovation of art. And what makes Palestinian embroidery also very, very fascinating for anyone who's interested in the more academic side of this topic is that when we talk about traditional arts, when we talk about folk arts, well, what sets folk arts separately or differently than fine arts, right? When we talk about fine arts, we're talking about painting and sculpture, and it's a very loaded kind of term, because it's a little bit elitist. It's like, oh, well, just European art is fine art, just Western art is fine art, right?
Right.
Well, the way that it's been generally defined is that folk arts and traditional arts are not innovative. What they are to perfect the craft. We're not intending on innovating, we're intending on perfecting. And that's the purpose of how and why we keep that art form alive. Fine art is an innovation. Every period has a kind of ups the next, is an evolution of the next, right? When we're talking about like painting and sculpture. Palestinian embroidery does not sit neatly in traditional arts. We see many evidences throughout history of innovation and modernization, and that being infused in our art based on political events. And I find that to be truly interesting in this study of this.
I love that. Oh, I love that. I'm so glad you got to share that, because a lot of people won't know that. They don't think of the political climate within Palestine and how it's affected something that's actually an artistic form of expression. So that's awesome. I'm going to kind of take it back a little bit on your journey in this process. So now, is this an art form that you learned as an adult, or is it something that you've honed for a longer period of time at a younger age? What was your education process like with Palestinian Tatreez? And I don't know if you had is it a formal education? Was it more, like you said, passed down from your ancestors, or your mom's mom, and that kind of thing?
First of all, my mother is an art teacher. She studied at Damascus University and became an art teacher in the 1970s. So when she had 3 daughters, she had a natural classroom in the house, and she always taught us crafts. I mean, I don't remember a time in my life when Tatreez was not a part of my day. Either mama was stitching or mama was teaching us how to stitch. Wow. And I developed as a child, I started learning at 2. There's a picture of me at 2 years old stitching, and I'll send it to you. Not stitching, actually pulling the waist canvas. 2 years old. I mean, think about that. I have a 4-year-old. And I know you have a child, 2 years old. You just learned how to walk, and you're learning the difference between yes and no.
Right.
You're learning how to use a fork and a spoon. You're learning how to sleep in your own bed and put on your t-shirt. You're learning the basics of survival. And I feel like Tatreez has always been a part of my basics for survival.
Wow.
So I spent my whole life just practicing this art and doing it. It was unbeknownst to me. I had no awareness of other people, other diaspora Palestinians not having access to this art. And it really didn't come to my attention that maybe I had some special knowledge or some knowledge I could share until I wrote the book.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to say it, but it was some, I don't want to say it was a dying art form, but not a lot of people, especially not like in our generation, not a lot of people knew how to do it. Like, I'll tell you right now, I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know how to do it. It's the same thing with like, sadly, the Arabic language sometimes, you know, most of the Arab world's now speaking English. So part of you is always like, you want to hold on to things like that because it is part of our identity and something that our ancestors really, they took this craft and they honed it. It was a beautiful thing. And like you mentioned, something that really tied in deeply to who they were and what they wanted to represent, which I love it. And I love that you basically brought it back in a way where now you're teaching people how to do it through your book, through the different workshops and seminars that you're doing. And, you know, I know you've traveled a lot to do all these things. So what has been your takeaway from that? And then do you have like a favorite experience where you were like, wow, this is what I should be doing, and what, like, this is my dream. This is what I want to do.
First of all, yes, I am so happy that Tatreez has found some popularity recently. It's still endangered in a sense because there's just so much commodification of the final product. And I hope that through my work, I'm raising awareness about exactly not just what it means and what it symbolizes and its history and all the other components of keeping it alive, but in addition, I'm providing more value so that like people who are selling Tatreez from Palestine, can ask for more because people will have more awareness of just how much work it is to put it together. So, you know, I guess, and you were asking about like one moment where I felt like this is what I should be doing. So I wrote the book before I got pregnant, and I continued writing it through pregnancy. I mean, when I was taking photographs for the book, I was like 6 months pregnant, 3 months pregnant, at some point 9 months pregnant. I mean, it was grueling. I did it. It was really hard.
Pregnancy is hard enough, so like...
It was hard. I mean, and when you're photographing textile objects, you're not using lighting. You're dealing with sun, clouds, and you know, a table, and it's really grueling on your body. I mean, I was in like workout clothes the whole time. It was so hard. So to do it, while I was pregnant, and then postpartum is when I started, you know, I released the book right before I had Malik, my child, and then within 6 weeks in postpartum, I was traveling for the book.
Wow.
And I guess that was kind of the big wake-up call for me, because I realized like I would never do this for anything else. I would put myself first. I would sleep, I would rest, I would be with my baby. But I did it because I wanted to, and it didn't feel like work. And I guess it was really at that point that I realized, like, I think that, you know, that was a sign to me that this was really something more to me than just a book. You know, because when I wrote the book, originally what I set out to do was just to document like the stories that my mom passed down to me and my sisters, and to document like the classes that she used to teach, like while we were kids. I mean, my mom before Tatreez and tea was like mama, like she was traveling, teaching, like there was no Tatreez trend then. I mean, she was getting like threats and stuff, you know? I mean, it was dangerous work for her to be doing that.
Man, I had no idea. That's sad. It makes me sad because it's supposed to be something beautiful that she's sharing, you know?
I mean, through the 80s and 90s, it, particularly, during that period, it was really difficult. I mean, Muslim immigrants in this country, in the United States, were really experiencing a lot of prejudice. And, I grew up dealing with prejudice in school. I mean, really difficult times. And, but I lost my train of thought, actually.
No, we were talking about with the book, why you wrote the book.
Oh, so yeah, the original basis of the book was just to document Mama's work and to really honor her work. But then as I was writing it, it became more of a journaling of like my own journey in Tatreez. And in the last chapter, Tatreez Revolution, I try to detail like how truly difficult I found in my life to connect with my identity beyond being Palestinian, and how Tatreez really feels like home to me. And that's what I want to, and that's why I want to teach. And so I think the journey of the book and writing the book brought me to this place, as well as then kind of finding all these gems after I released the book that were like, okay, this is what I want. This is who I am. This doesn't feel like work, you know?
And that's really like, I always tell people that is the goal. You want to do something that you love so much, that you're super passionate about, that you don't feel like you're going to work every day. Right. And I love that you said the word about journaling. It's almost like cathartic, right? To be able to put pen to paper and be like, this is my journey. And for me, I mean, I like writing, but for me, this is actually what the podcast became for me, where it's like, it's super cathartic because I'm a talker. So I like when I love seeing people follow their journey, where it's like they hone what is part of them and what makes them them. And I love hearing that Tatreez was essentially like a part of you from the beginning. And it's something that everyone kind of has to find, like, what makes me me, and how can I make that a part of my everyday life? And I love that you were able to do that.
And so, I hope through classes, like, and that's kind of what I want to teach, is like, I want to give another avenue for Palestinians in diaspora to connect with their identity. If it doesn't resonate, it's all good, Right. But if there's this chance that I can teach someone how to connect more with their identity and with this sense of home that I think is really a tortured part of our lives in exile, feeling that you're home, feeling a sense of home, and a sense of belonging is something we have all struggled with. I think beyond being Palestinian, and everybody goes through their journey with that. If Tatreez can help aid in that journey in any way, like, it feels healing,
It's absolutely correct. It's funny because one of my friends, so when I first went to Palestine, I went with a group of Palestinian-Americans, and it was a lot of us. It was our first time going, and one of the girls there, I'm going to give her a little shout out, Lina Barkawi. So we have the same last name, but we're not like directly related. We're from different villages, but she's now doing Tatreez, and she picked it up from your book. She picked it up from, I think she did workshops with you.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah.
So I always see her work, like she like posts, and I could tell like she's so passionate and excited about it. And I'm just like, I love that, because you were able to give that to someone like her who was finding their Palestinian identity. And I just remember Lena being like everyone else on that trip, we were like starry-eyed, like, oh my God, we're visiting home. And then to see her like have come to this point where she's like enjoying and living, her Palestinian identity through Tatreez, and like she shares it. I'm always like, oh, this is so cool. I was like, I need to make more time. I need to do this.
She's just a wonderful example where like you don't need a lot of instruction. Like I think she took like 1 or 2 classes, and she's now doing these major solo projects, and she's even producing her own thobe. And like, you can really take this in any direction that you want. And it's really so much about you and where you're at, and just having those basics explained.
So do you have a favorite piece that you've embroidered, or like one of your favorite pieces that has significance to you?
Everything I stitch has significance to me.
It's like, or like a very special one where you're like, this is something I think I'll just carry on.
Yeah, it's just a funny, because like people are like, oh, can you sell that? It's like, unless you want to pay like $10 million. So I would say probably my denim jacket. I stitched the missiles design on my denim
Oh, wow.
jacket, and I have it. I should go get it, actually. Do you want to see it?
Yeah, you know what? I'll pause it and then you can grab it.
Okay.
Go ahead. Okay.
So my favorite piece is my denim jacket. This is the back of the denim jacket. I did it in, I guess, 2019, 2018. No, 2018, I did it. And it was cool. Like, the second I posted it on Instagram, like, tons of people started doing the same project. I'm even offering a denim jacket series in November and scheduling the next one because it's sold out in 3 days.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's a really great project.
The denim jacket series, you're teaching people how to do Tatreez on denim jackets?
Yeah.
Nice. I love that.
I customized like a particular pattern for this series that's all the different star motifs of Palestine from all the different villages. So we kind of have a night sky, and the intention with that particular project was just to connect us under the same night sky, because we're all stitching, we're all still in quarantine, and just to feel like we're all connected and we're all under the same, on the same earth, we're still connected in some way.
Right.
But also it's ancient, like star motifs are ancient and date back to 5000 BC, the motifs on our garments. So I felt like it's a connection to the past and to the future. Yeah. So the denim jacket that I did incorporates the missiles design, and it's actually traditionally, they're amulets. These sort of triangular amulets are really ancient motifs, but this particular pattern is the missiles, and it was adapted as the missiles in the 1920s during the British Mandate period, during a period of occupation for Palestinians, the introduction of weapons and other kinds of like rockets and things like that, and violence. And Palestinian women stitched the missiles design in a protest to the British occupation and the murmurings of a future Zionist state, because that started a decade, before 1948. So in any case, I adapted the pattern. I put it on the back of my denim jacket because after I gave birth to my son, a few months later, I herniated 4 discs in my spine, and I was diagnosed with a spinal disorder, which normally is diagnosed in teenage, as a teenager, but they didn't catch it because there was so much weakness after childbirth in my core that it just kind of everything emerged. Oh, wow. I couldn't walk for almost 2 months with a almost 1-year-old. Okay. And it was horrible. I couldn't walk. I was crawling around on my elbows. I could barely lay down flat. I had to lay over a chair all the time. And it was just really a difficult period and a long recovery process. I stitched the missiles on the back of my denim jacket to represent the destruction of my body. Oh, wow. And I started stitching it while I was in a lot of pain. So there's some mistakes in the stitching, but they're really in honor of the pain I was experiencing at the time. And it's just a really meaningful piece because some people ask like, well, why did you put blue on blue? And you should have used more contrast. I wanted the missiles to be invisible a little because I felt invisible. I felt really invisible during that time. I felt like nobody could see my pain. I felt like that's the best way to put it, is that I just felt very invisible. And because I didn't have, when I finally was able to walk and leave the house, no one could tell that I was in constant pain. And I just wanted those missiles to represent that invisibility that I felt in that time.
Yeah. Oh, that's so powerful. I'm so sorry. That sounds like such an internal struggle and journey, and not a lot of people can see that. I mean, obviously I didn't herniate discs, but I can understand the invisibility piece you mentioned, because when I had my son, he had to be hospitalized for a month. He was recovering from a major surgery they didn't know that they had to do until I gave birth to him. And I just remember that was it was the loneliest part or time of my life, because as a new mother, not being able to take care of your child who's in the hospital, like I would go visit him, but I just remember being like helpless and feeling like I can't give what I've been basically, like I've been trained to do. Like I'm ready to be this person.
Mother. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I just like did what I could, but I just remember being home and like just being like and recovering from C-section and just feeling incredibly alone. Didn't have really as much emotional support as I needed, and so it was an internal struggle. And I can totally understand that piece of it, because I just felt like that's what the straw that broke the camel's back, where I'm like, there's something missing in my life. And that's where I kind of realized that, actually, for lack of a better word, like that's when I really saw my marriage for what it was. And then it just kind of gradually got worse from there. But because I was like, I needed a partner, and I didn't feel that. And so I just felt like I was like, yeah, this doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like, usually, you get closer together, and sometimes trauma brings you together and sometimes trauma rips you apart. And so
Rips you apart. It can,
yeah.
absolutely. And I think loneliness and helplessness is definitely a part of motherhood that we don't really talk about.
Yeah.
And I found parenting to be really like this ongoing exercise of surrender.
Mm-hmm.
And in this act of surrender, I've had to learn reclamation of myself, and how important that is to have a strong sense of identity, a strong sense of who I am, in order to successfully surrender to be a good parent. I mean, to surrender to the circumstances. You can't control all of the factors that your child will experience. And I understand that feeling of total isolation. And I mean, I think that for me, in the marriage I just left, going through a divorce myself right now, that Tatreez has really helped me feel less alone, and that there is a hope to be understood, because I can understand other women, and I can understand something. I mean, you got to hold on to what you have. And I think for me, Tatreez is something that I always have.
Yeah, I love that. It's interesting. I just read a quote recently, and I thought it was so powerful. Is extreme independence is also a trauma response. And you talked about reclamation, where I'm like, being a mother, like when I finally did have my son back home, he required a lot of attention. And I mean, like, obviously he got better, he's great, but I'm just saying, like, at that time, it was a lot of doctor's appointments and making sure everything was going okay. And it was, like you said, I had basically surrendered myself to this one role of mother. But and I tell people now, like, I'm much more than that. Not saying that that's not enough. I'm just saying there's so many different parts of me that I had to reclaim over time. And something that I always hope and wish that my son will admire about me as he grows up, where it's like, my mom's one strong ass woman, like it's just one of those things where you're like, they don't appreciate it obviously as much as when they get older, but I always leave that thought in the back of my mind, like, yeah, maybe I don't give him everything now, where it's like, I don't coddle him as much as I used to. Like, I let him, I push him, like, be your own independent person. I want you to learn that. I don't want you to be codependent on me or your dad. And I try to give him that space, but it's hard because as a mom, you're just like, I just want to help and protect you. You're like my little bird. But
I know. Well, that's our instinct, you know. I feel you on that. And I think what really resonated with me when you said, like, well, it's not to say motherhood isn't enough, but motherhood is an expression of yourself. And if you're not expressing yourself, if you don't know yourself, if you're not fulfilling yourself, then your motherhood is limited to what that is, you know? But motherhood for me is a presentation of self. It's a presentation of values. It's a presentation of my own lessons, my wisdom, my learning, my humble, ongoing learning, you know?
Right.
And my vulnerability, also expression of vulnerability to our children. That is so important for them to feel understood. And so, yeah, it's about feeding that, you know?
You know, it's funny because especially because we're raising men. I mean, I can't tell you how much,
Yeah.
like the minute I see my son again, I sit him down and I say like, how are you feeling? How are you doing? Like the other day he was talking to me about remote learning and I was like, and I know him, his attention spans like, so I was like, how is that going? And he goes, usually he'll be like, it's good, just to like, you know, but this time I love that he was able to open up to me and just be like, sometimes it's boring. I was like, yeah, I get that. It's a little boring. Do you get to take breaks? Do you get this? Like, it just prompts this conversation where I'm like, I want you to feel comfortable to share how you're really feeling. Or like if he's upset or if he's crying, I'm like, it's okay to be sad. It's okay to do that. Like, and I kind of try to normalize all these things that we as a society, I guess in past generations as well, constantly tell men like, you just can't be these things. And I'm just like, no, it's okay to be a little soft. It's okay to be this. It makes you human, and I feel like it connects people, and I think men tend to struggle with that. They tend to struggle connecting on a human level sometimes because they lack that depth of emotion, because they were conditioned to do so, and I try very hard to uncondition him, if you know what I mean. So especially because we're raising men, I feel like it's so important sometimes.
I mean, 100%. And I'm raising a Black Palestinian boy, and his father can teach him how to be a Black man. I mean, I can't teach him how to be Black. I'm Palestinian. I can teach him what I know. What I do know.
You have fears though about what he may face in life.
I do.
Identities.
100%.
Yeah.
And his father doesn't cease to remind me. But what I do know is that I can teach him what it looks like to be present with yourself, how to calm yourself down, how to follow instructions when someone with authority is speaking to you, when you are in a situation where you're by yourself and you're upset, what you can do to find peace in the moment. These are things that I feel that I can help him with, that can help guide and encourage and validate what he's learning from his father. Of course, now it's complicated because I'm not interacting so much with his father on the day-to-day stuff like I used to. But I feel that I have a strong sense of understanding of what could cause a lack of direction and like outbursts of behavior, and it's about centering self. And I feel like that's the route that I can help with. And that's what I would do for my child, no matter Black, whatever they were mixed with, It's a value, I think, or it's a sort of a important aspect of identity that I think everyone is seeking out,
I love that. You're gonna have to send me some resources because I need to work with that with my son on that, which is centering yourself and being mindful. He's just like always playing, always like all over the place. His energy is unmatched. But
yeah.
Because I'm just like, I would love for him to know if there was something happening or if he was uncomfortable, like how do you control your emotions and control your reactions? I always feel like sometimes he suppresses what he feels. That's why I constantly like encourage him to speak. But I'm a good communicator, and I'm learning as an adult how to be mindful of my emotions and how to control my reactions and everything like that. But as a child, I find that so interesting, and I would love resources if you have them, because I was like, I need to work with my son on that.
I'll definitely share some resources. A big big part of it takes a village. So, I have to do my work. I've been seeing a therapist, for over 10 years, and she's always given me a lot of tools,
That's awesome.
that have helped me. And I feel like we can only really take as I was saying, I think we were talking about before, motherhood is a presentation of self, and we can only really teach what we know. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect or have total emotional control. I mean, I'm human, and I have faced my battle with depression and anxiety, and I still do, but I do have a lot more tools now than I did 10 years ago. And I hope that so like there's things that you can share, like humming. Humming is something you can do when you're hugging your child and they need help calming down. It's weird, but we hum all the time in our day when we're kind of singing a song or doing something. Humming has a healing capacity. So it's just things like that, and like kind of transferring it on a level to your child. And, and it's about that consistency, because it's that repeated, it's like giving them green peas. Then they don't like green peas, and they tell you, well, repeated exposure, they'll eventually eat it and try it. It's, I think, the same thing with this kind of work.
That's a good point. Repeated exposure. I like that. So I'm going to actually go back to our conversation. I'm sorry. We went on like a mom. I could tangent stuff all day. Yes. Tangents. So with Tatreez, I know we spoke about it. There's been a progression of it. I'm not gonna lie, I've seen free people use Tatreez designs and different brands, and it's become this westernized. What do you think about appropriation versus appreciation in terms of Western brands taking Tatreez and kind of incorporating it into their own designs?
Yeah, so this is a big subject. I have actually debated a number of people on this. And I found the most compelling argument I would say the most compelling points that were made were by Omar Baddar. And he works at, we were just talking about him, but he was at AJ Plus and Al Jazeera, and now at the IMEU. He one time told me, it was years ago, and if he's listening to this podcast, it's funny, it's full circle.
Yeah.
That there's a difference between industry and individual. And when industry is divorcing our traditions and our traditional patterns and our traditional placement and design from its indigenous history, then that's extremely problematic. So we're talking about Dodo Bar, we're talking about Topshop and their play suit that was made out of the kufiya.
Right.
We're talking about Zara and their supposed chest design. I mean, it looks like a Palestinian chest design, but there's no connection to Palestine. I have a major problem with that.
Yeah.
When we're talking individuals who have support, they're supporting Palestinian women, so they understand where their embroidery is coming from. They know who stitched it, let's say, or they inherited the embroidery, but they're aware of its origins and can speak to that. I think that that's really what we want. I mean, we want our allies raising awareness about who we are and where we come from. And I think we're all a big part of that activism. So I think that this is what we need. We need more advocates, and we can't just say, well, only if you're and qualify, only if you're Palestinian can you, no. I think our allies can support us here.
100%. I think I'm of the same mindset, which is if someone that's not Palestinian or not Arab is wearing a kufiya, or they're wearing something with Tatreez embroidery, I actually appreciate that if, like you said, they know where its origins are and are making a stand with us. But if you're just wearing it because you saw it at Topshop and you have no idea what it is, and that's because they're lacking giving credit where credit is due, that I have to do with, because I'm just like, well, now you're just profiting off of something that you're not actually increasing awareness, increasing education on it. If you're willing to take the step of using it for your design, then take the extra step of educating people on it. I don't care what you have to do. You could put it on the tag for all I care, but just mention that this is the origins of this design. And I think that's where they lack. I think at least industry does, of course. So I'm gonna. Oh, go ahead.
Can I interrupt you really fast?
Yeah,
I want to speak to my work in eliminating the concern for cultural appropriation through education. I have an incredible amount of students who are not Palestinian that join these classes of mine. And my main focus is teaching the history about what we are about to stitch. And that way, when they stitch it, if they choose to stitch it again, or whatever happens with that piece they stitch, they know the history. Now, of course, it's on them,
right,
to remember and recall it. But my kufiyya series, for instance, the one, I have a kufiyya series where I teach how to do tatreez on your kufiyya, because the kufiyya fabric can be really tricky and there's some techniques there. I teach the history about the kufiyya and the appropriation of the kufiyya and how we can all be active. And we have a whole conversation in the first session about like what are we going to do to ensure that when we wear a kufiyya, we connect it to its indigenous history after I've reviewed the indigenous history. So I think that as a teacher, this is a huge part of my work.
For those that don't know, by the way, kufiyya is the and I'm sure people have seen it. It's the black and white checkered. It's a scarf that Palestinians and supporters of Palestine will wear. It was actually it was created in an act of resistance during the Intifada. I believe it was. I want to say it was the first Intifada. Was it the first or the second? I can't remember.
Actually, the kufiyya started to be worn in the Arab riots in the 1930s.
Okay. In a response. I'm not as aware, but I just remember it gained traction probably during Intifadas. I think that's what I wanted to say. But yes, go ahead.
Yeah. It was very popularized during that period. Of course, so you're asking I do like a whole hour presentation on this.
No, I just wondered, I was like, because we said kufiyya a couple of times, I was like, if no one knows what a kufiyya is, it is that black and white checkered scarf that you see, which was created in an act of resistance for Palestinians, by Palestinians. So I was like, just so people know. But yeah, there's a whole thing about it. It's been a while since I've read history, but yes. Go ahead.
No, it's not. No, I mean, the only reason I know it verbatim is because I'm researching it every day. It's my job. Okay, this isn't your job. This is my job. So, I mean, don't worry about. But yeah, I mean, just for listeners, the Palestinian kufiyya is a traditional like headdress of the Fallahi man, of the male Palestinian male villagers in Palestine historically, and in the 1930s, amidst murmurings of the project for a Zionist state in Palestine, Fallahi men started to use the kufiyya as their badge as a part of the protests, the Arab riots, that ultimately was squashed by British military and authorities. And of course, we know the fate of the Zionist state now, but that's really how it emerged. And then Yasser Arafat, at the time a popular, figure in the 1950s and 60s, he wore the kufiyya every single day, and he was really a celebrity at the time. And of course, we have Layla Khalid and other Palestinians who also revolutionized the symbol to become female as well as male.
Yes, love that. I'm a big fan of Layla Khalid. So I was going to kind of, what is it?
Sorry to go off.
No, that's okay. I'm glad you gave context to it because, there's people that are listening that are but it's a really good history lesson, because what people don't realize is Palestinians, we're so proud of our identity, and anything that we create is a form of resistance, because we are essentially telling the world like we exist because we have been told so many times that we do not, or that we do not have a place in the world.
Yeah.
So we constantly are like creating, and we're revolutionizing, and we're sharing it with the world purposefully, because we're trying to tell the world like we exist, and we are sharing all this with the world. So when the world takes it and then doesn't want to credit us, we make it a point to be like, no, this is our work. This is part of our history, part of our identity. Always as a reminder. I mean, every single Palestinian I know is constantly living in this, like, I stand firm and strong in who I am as a Palestinian, because I've been told so many times that I don't belong, or that I don't have a place. And that's really why we kind of shout it from the rooftops, because some people don't get that, but I'm like, that's essentially what we're doing. We're constantly like, this is who we are, and we exist whether you like it or not. And it's a form of, believe it or not, like you doing Tatreez and tea, people talking about the kufiyas, like this is all an act of rebellion against the suppression of Palestinian identity.
Yeah, it is. It's a daily activism. And the interesting part of Tatreez being a tool of protest is it's so unlikely. When we think of protest art, what do we think of? We think of signs. Mm-hmm. We think of graffiti.
Right.
We think of these kinds of fast, in the moment, rebellious acts. Mm-hmm. Tatreez is a painstakingly long process, stitch by stitch, mm-hmm. and it takes months to create a single piece if you're dedicated enough. And and I talk about this in my classes, that Tatreez teaches us sabr, which is patience, and samud, which is like this kind of resiliency. Mm. And that's ultimately the kind of resistance that Palestinians require to endure this journey that we're on right now.
Right. We're playing the long game. I always tell people, like, we're playing the long game. It's been over 70 years and we're still doing it. And I love that you said that, because I was going to actually ask you, what do you feel like people have taken away from it? So I love the word patience, sabr, and samud, which is resilience. And I was actually going to ask you, do you find that it's a stress relief for people? Has it been something where people are like able to dedicate their time and just kind of almost be able to get out anything they're feeling through the art of Tatreez?
100%. I think that at first, when you're first teaching this art form, I think everyone goes in with the intention of like, this is going to be awesome. There's a moment when fear rushes over them. Like, what did I just commit to? This is so much work.
I do public speaking, so I can relate to this, like, fear. Like when I tell them like, oh, I'm recording you and you have to watch yourself in the recording, they're like, what? So,
they're like, huh?
Yeah.
Exactly. And then they're just like, what the heck am I doing? And then they start stitching and they're like, oh, you know?
Yeah.
And then after and normally around the 3rd, 4th hour, you know, final hours of class, or when they go on and take this work home, they start to find their rhythm. Mm. And it's in that rhythm that they find that meditation and that healing. Sometimes when you stitch, there's a pattern that's so freaking stressful because you can't freaking count it properly. You're just like 2, 1, 2, 5, 7, and you're like trying to put it. Those ones are for your days where you are on top of it.
Yeah.
For the days that you need healing and meditation, you go for some other motif. You don't go for those motifs that, you know, stress you out, you know, right. Or that project. I always have like 7 projects going. And, you know, there's the one project that's always really complicated, but then there's some other projects that are just really straightforward, and I'm just repeating the same pattern again and again. That's the healing one, because I'm just like, I don't have to think about it. I can just, you know.
That's so neat. I didn't even think of that. No, so that's really cool, because my next question was actually going to be like, this is something that the average person can learn. You know, what tips would you have for people? So that actually is really helpful for anyone that wants to try it out. So here's what I was going to ask. So
Yeah.
are you, in the time of COVID, I want to assume that you're doing virtual classes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep, all virtual. Everything's online. I offer beginner classes, and I also have recorded sessions for people who don't want to attend the live classes or who want to do recorded at their leisure. And so I do offer the beginning classes. I used to do like a level 1, level 2, whatever, like elaborate kind of graduation of experience, but I just kind of collapsed it recently. So basically, if you take a beginner class, you can go on to do a series class. Some people keep taking beginner classes because I do different patterns every time I teach a beginner class to get some practice. And then when they feel ready, they'll move to a series class. Like we're talking village series, denim jacket series, something that's like, you know, many classes long, a larger project.
Awesome.
I also have a program on my website called Tatreez Takeout. And it's like a take-home version of a class. It's basically like a digital download, and it's got the pattern, the strategy, which like I've counted, like I'm like 1, 2, it's like connect the dots, where to start and like where to move on it. I give the history, I give like all the details of it, and then I kind of explain the stitching strategy and then the color choice if it fits a factor. That way people can stitch at home. So I'm trying to make this art as accessible as possible for people. To do anytime, anywhere, anyone. Hopefully it helps bring healing for people during this time, but also just ongoing.
Yeah, I love that. And if people wanted to get the book and the supplies, how are they able to do that?
So for the book, you can buy it off of Amazon or you can buy it off my website. I offer it for cheaper on my website, but they're print on demand. So you do have to wait for the book to be printed and shipped to you, which is like over 2 weeks, or not over 2 weeks, but within a 2-week period. And then for supplies, I have them listed on my website, tatreeznt.com. I don't offer kits. Because the supplies that you need, there's like 4 supplies. You literally just need the fabric, the thread, the needle, and the scissors. And when you get them off of, I have an Amazon list, like where a portion of the proceeds will come back to Tatreez and Tea, but you can buy them from any local fabric store. And when you get them, they actually last you many projects. So you can take that and run with it for the next few months. Or even years. Some of those balls of thread last us years.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, that's good to know. Well, this kind of concludes our interview. Just wanted to say this was so wonderful to learn about the art of Tatreez and your incredible book and projects. For those that need a reminder, the book is called Tatreez and Tea, Embroidery and Storytelling in the Palestinian Diaspora, and you can get it on Amazon or on tatreeznt.com. Be sure to get your copy and tag Wafa in your designs at Tatreez and Tea handle. We were talking about it before, but she gets excited to see people's work. Would love to see what you all come up with. And it honestly sounds like such a great activity for all of us to also pick up during quarantine. I know myself included, it's like on my list of things that I want to do once my job dies down a little bit. I'm like, all right, this is something that I just need to like work on. And I think I'd get really proud if I like make something happen. So thank you again.
You can do it.
Yeah.
You can do it.
Is this, oh my God, I think I stuck. Thank you again, Wafa, for joining us. It was such a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I loved it. Thank you to all our listeners, and be sure to subscribe and share this episode and all our past and future episodes, and we will talk to you next time. Thank you so much.